What does this species have in common with this species? Or with this species of animal? And what do these animals have in common with this animal? As strange as it may seem, all four animals belong to the same major evolutionary group, or phylum, the phylum Chordata. They are all chordates. Every chordate has four characteristic features inherited from its ancestors, but you won't necessarily see these in the adult. A 40-hour-old chicken embryo shows these characteristic features. An internal rod, or notochord, that will become the chicken's backbone. Lying next to the notochord is a hollow nerve cord on the dorsal side of the body, a hollow dorsal nerve cord. A tail containing both the nerve cord and notochord extends behind the animal's anus, a post-anal tail. Although difficult to see at this stage, the chicken embryo also has a set of embryonic gills, a feature more easily seen in a salamander larva. The gills are associated with the throat, or pharynx, and so are called pharyngeal gills. These embryonic gills will be lost as the salamander matures. All chordates show the four ancestral features: notochord, hollow dorsal nerve cord, pharyngeal gills, and post-anal tail. The simplest chordates, the tunicates, or sea squirts, can often be found on ocean-side docks. These sac-like creatures have two openings, a mouth and an excurrent pore. The mouth has finger-like projections that filter out large objects. It opens into a mesh-like basket, a pharyngeal gill, used for oxygen exchange and for trapping suspended food. Driven by cilia, water circulates through the mesh and out the excurrent opening. To follow the path of food, we fed this one some charcoal particles. The charcoal became entangled in mucus, traveled to the side and down, accumulating in the tunicate's stomach. The charcoal shows that after digestion, the feces is eliminated near the excurrent opening. Tunicates have a unique type of circulatory system with a heart that pumps in one direction for a while and then switches, circulating the tunicate's clear blood throughout its body. Most tunicates have both sexes in one individual, and the gametes are squirted directly into the sea. The sperm swim until a chance encounter with a drifting egg. The fertilized egg develops into a microscopic, free-swimming larva, a tadpole larva, the stage that shows the chordate features. Beginnings of the pharyngeal gill, a notochord, beside the notochord a hollow dorsal nerve cord, and the extended post-anal tail. The larva swims only an hour or two and then settles. In the next 2 hours, it makes a remarkable transformation. Tail and notochord are lost, and the larva begins to change into an adult tunicate. The juvenile tunicate will spend the rest of its life as an attached filter feeder. About 1,000 different species of tunicates live in the world's oceans. Some have solitary lifestyles. Others live in social groupings. And some live communally, sharing a common excurrent opening. A related group, the Larvaceans, lives in the open sea. They look like tunicate tadpole larvae, but these are adults. In Larvaceans, there is no attached stage. Tunicates and Larvaceans are members of the subphylum Urochordata, a group that branched off early in chordate evolution. But how did the ancestors of these primitive chordates evolve into vertebrates such as fish and humans? The answer can be found by taking a hike. The high slopes of the Rocky Mountains may seem like a strange place to find animals that live in the ocean. But here, in ancient sediments, known as the Burgess Shales, are the imprints of early marine animals, including members of phylum Chordata. This animal, Pikaia, is one of the earliest known chordates. Living in the oceans over 520 million years ago, Pikaia shows the basic chordate characteristics: notochord, dorsal nerve cord, pharyngeal gill, postanal tail. But Pikaia had something else going for it: muscles. Angled pairs of muscles along the length of the body worked against its flexible notochord to propel Pikaia through the water. Similar animals live today in shallow tropical seas, sea lancelets. This is the sea lancelet branchiostoma. Branchia, gill; stoma, mouth. Gill mouth. Branchiostoma has the same angled muscle pairs seen in the Pikaia fossils. This musculature allows Branchiostoma to swim like an eel, curving its body in S-shaped waves. But most of the time, Branchiostoma burrows into the sand, sticking its head out and, like a tunicate, pulling in suspended food using cilia on its pharyngeal gills. Branchiostoma and Pikaia are examples of a second major group of chordates, the subphylum Cephalochordata. Both the urochordates and the cephalochordates were early branches in the chordate line. Primitive animals from a third major chordate branch can be found by venturing into the deep ocean. Take along a bag of dead salmon for bait. Here in the darkness, it's not long before the decaying salmon attracts swarms of scavengers, hagfish. In the lab, a hagfish shows its primitive characteristics: no jaws, excurrent openings for the pharyngeal gills. It lacks the paired fins of more advanced fishes, and it has a rasping tongue, used to burrow into dead tissue. Hagfish are also called slime eels, and for good reason. When the animal is threatened, its skin secretes chemicals that react with seawater to create a slimy protective ball. In many ways, these jawless fish are only a few evolutionary steps from Branchiostoma and Pikaia. You can see this best by looking at a hagfish relative, the lamprey. A lamprey larva is similar to Branchiostoma, but with a pumping pharynx. Hagfish and lampreys, jawless fish, are primitive representatives of the largest branch of chordates, subphylum Vertebrata. Several evolutionary steps marked the change from jawless fish to modern vertebrates. First, paired fins and jaws evolved, and later, a cartilaginous skeleton. By 340 million years ago, cartilaginous fishes similar to this ratfish were swimming the world's oceans. Modern cartilaginous fish include the sharks and rays. About 1,000 species of these graceful predators are found throughout the world. A second development was the evolution of a skeleton hardened with calcium. Today there are over 22,000 species of bony fish, one of the most colorful and diverse groups of animals. And like today, the seas of 400 million years ago teemed with fish. Then, as now, competition for food was severe. But above the waterline, a potential food source was invading the land. What happened next is modeled today in mangrove swamps, where a keen-eyed predator hunts the shoreline. What allows these fish to capture terrestrial prey? Fins adapted for a crude form of walking. As long as its skin stays damp and it can periodically wet its gills, a mud skipper is equally at home in or out of the water. They model a lifestyle practiced by a group of fish that lived 400 million years ago. These lobe-finned fish had pairs of fins reinforced with bones. Also, outpockets from the lower pharynx allowed them to supplement gill breathing with air breathing. Like mud skippers, some of these fish could walk, and no doubt hunted the shallows and shorelines. In one line of lobed-finned fish, the bones lengthened, leading to an animal with 4 legs, a tetrapod. The stage was set for animals to become land hunters, such as this 370 million-year-old predator. Tetrapods were the ancestors of all land-dwelling vertebrates, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. The transition from water to land is seen in an early branch of tetrapods, the amphibians. Amphibians use mouth pumping and body movements to force air in and out of their lungs. But like early tetrapods, amphibians are still tied to the water for reproduction. Two things help liberate vertebrates from their dependence on water. Internal fertilization, a way to get egg and sperm together independent of a body of water, and this package, the encased or amniotic egg. Of course, eggs were around since the beginning of sexual reproduction. But this egg had a hard outer covering, a shell and membranes that held fluid, bathing the embryo. The shell was also permeable, allowing gases to enter and escape. Membranes inside the egg include the yolk sac. It holds the fatty food supply. The amnion contains the fluid that bathes the embryo. The allantois gathers and holds wastes. Finally, a large sac, the chorion, contains all of the other sacs and creates a protective barrier against bacteria. Essentially, the amniotic egg contains the aquatic environment of its amphibian ancestors, and it allowed vertebrates to become terrestrial animals. In one group, the reptiles, scales evolved, limiting water loss. Reptiles include several modern groups such as turtles, snakes, and lizards. And several extinct groups, including the most popular animals from the past to capture our imaginations, the dinosaurs. Of course, all of the dinosaurs became extinct, except one branch. In these dinosaurs, the forelimbs became modified, holding a flap of skin. Bones of the chest evolved into a strengthened ridge, the sternum, an attachment site for powerful muscles. Bones became hollow, thinner and lighter, but still retaining their strength. And scales became modified into elaborate feathers. The descendants of these dinosaurs are the birds. Often placed in a class of their own, the class Aves. Modern birds are diverse with over 8,000 different species, some adapted for soaring, for predation, grouping for protection, probing. They even fly underwater. Birds are masters of territorial and courtship display. And they care for their young. Mammals have a coat of hairy insulation and feed their young with milk secreted by mammary glands. The first mammals laid eggs. Descendants of these egg layers, the monotremes, live in Australia. The duck-billed platypus, and the echidna, or spiny anteater. Echidnas lay eggs in a pouch. A special egg tooth helps the embryo out of the shell. The young echidna hangs on, feeding on milk secreted by a primitive mammary gland, long after it's too large for the pouch. A second group of mammals, the marsupials, give birth to embryos which quickly move to the marsupium, where they continue to develop attached to a nipple. Even when they can move on their own, juveniles return to the marsupium for milk and protection. Almost 300 species of marsupials live in Australia and South America, including the familiar koala and wombat. But a third group of mammals has been far more successful. Placental mammals carry their developing embryos inside. The word placental refers to the membrane that grows inside the womb as an interface between embryo and mother. Embedded with fine capillaries, the placenta exchanges gases and nutrients with the embryo's blood system, allowing it to grow. As a result, placental mammals give birth to relatively well-formed young. In numbers of species, in niches they occupy, and in geographic distribution, placental mammals are a spectacular success. So, an ancient animal with pharyngeal gills, a hollow dorsal nerve cord, a notochord, and postanal tail, became the ancestor of three evolutionary lines: the urochordates, the cephalochordates, and the dominant group of chordate animals, the vertebrates.